shit. Don't care anymore what you say, 'cause it's my life. Do. Go ahead with your own life. Leave me alone. Don't forget that you're a victim of circumstance. I never meant to be the victim of your romance. I still go on. Don't get me wrong. But you can speak your mind, but not on my time. I don't care anymore what you say, 'cause it's my life. Do. Go ahead with your own life. Leave me alone. William Joel, Sir William Joel, I believe he's been knighted. One of the best to ever do it, and by it I mean write incredibly cheesy and insanely hostile and narcissistic songs that weirdly over-rely on cheesy sound effects. Billy Joel is about the only contemporary songwriter of any note in popular culture to, before hip-hop, I guess, to consistently put little sound effects in his songs, like making literal the fucking content of the song, like moving out with the vroom at the end, or there's one where their TV starts. Like, dude, come on, man. It's a song. People know what's happening. It's so funny because you'd think it would make his work specifically and exclusively, specifically suitable to the, what do you call it? God damn it. To the jukebox musical. That's what I was thinking. And there was a Billy Joel jukebox musical called Moving Out. Twyla Tharp did the choreography, and I believe it was a one-season flop, which is, like I said, amazing because his songs are many of them are stories. He loves peopling them with that kind of, theater-style elements, theatrical elements. I kind of wonder, I never saw it, obviously, but I kind of wonder if it flopped in part because any protagonist, like imagine the main character in a play where he's got to sing Billy Joel songs like every 10 minutes. Imagine what an absolute fucking douchebag that character would be. Every song by Billy Joel is somebody saying, fuck you, I'm cool, you suck, or trying to exculpate himself or demand something of someone else. Don't go changing to try to save me. If that's what you call moving on, well, I'm moving out. Hey, good luck in the suburbs. Here I am at the piano, and they're asking me, man, what are you doing here? It's like, God damn, this guy's a fucking smug, hostile prick. And I'm assuming the main character in the show was as well. I don't know. Probably never going to see it, but whatever. Some of the songs are still pretty goddamn catchy. Okay. Have I talked to you guys about the white noise thing yet? Because I really think this is really interesting. So, if you guys know anything about the movie biz, right now, one of the hottest power couples in creative end of Hollywood is Noah Baumbach, Felix's least favorite director, and Greta Gerwig, his younger female paramour. It's funny. Noah Baumbach is like the dark Alexander Payne for Felix, because Felix loves Alexander Payne and he hates Baumbach. And I honestly think part of the reason comes down to the fact that Baumbach is actually Jewish, and Alexander Payne is a Midwestern Greek guy, which means he's basically Jewish in that his relationship to mid-America milieu is like similarly alienated, but it's not quite the same thing, which means for, someone who's immersed in Jewishness their whole life, less maybe annoying. So anyway, he hates Baumbach, so Baumbach has been making these Netflix movies for a while now. He's on the creative end of the loss leader ledger for Netflix. We've got Baumbach, the guy who made movies like like Margot at the Wedding and The Squid and the Whale, middlebrow classics at the very tail end of independent theater as a concept. And in those early days, he was married to celebrated and talented actress Jennifer Jason Leigh. But they had an affair, I believe in part because he cheated on her with Greta Gerwig. If not, he cheated on her with somebody for sure. And then he ended up making a movie about it, Marriage Story, and hooking up with Greta Gerwig. And together they've collaborated on a couple of movies. And she's like his younger protege. And also wife, I guess, or girlfriend, I don't know. But so they're both indie people, who came out of those moderate budgeted movies that existed on the margins of the big studios and were meant to, gobble up, make enough money for investors, but were not supposed to be huge ledger items. But of course, that whole economy has been swamped by quantitative easing more than anything. I mean, we talked about at the end of last week about how the final time fix to the crisis of capitalism now is in quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve. And what that means is now there's so much money circulating that profits have to be massive to justify investments. And because investments are massive, because there's nowhere else to put it. So it's just laundering through the system. So these guys all get squashed out. So he got to enjoy sort of the apogee of that. Like I said, Squid and the Whale, Margot at the Wedding. These movies played in theaters. I went and saw them in theaters. They were talked about by cognigency and literati. Greta Gerwig, younger, of course, comes in a little later. She gets a few of those before she ends up getting swallowed by the same economy he does. And so I think because gender plays a role, but also the generational thing, Baumbach had longer to establish his name as like a brand. They are now both at the two ends of the stick of like the creative in Hollywood now, the filmmaker at least, film runner, showrunner, whatever. So if you're a filmmaker with any kind of clout in the industry, your choices are you can make shit on Netflix that will never get seen by or seen by anyone or talked about by anyone. Some people will watch it while they're on their phones or folding laundry. They might tweet about it a little bit. It might get a little bit of meme rubbish, but that conversational, the thing you went into it for, basically, to be someone that people talk about. What are the thing that fuels the egos of filmmakers? That's gone. But they'll give you creative freedom because they're just signing checks. They're just an algorithm that's making decisions. You don't have studio executives and people thinking that they actually have a role. And of course, creatives hate those people, but we know now from the Netflix example that some pushback requires filmmakers to get more ingenious and to look at their film and address it critically in a way that they wouldn't otherwise, and makes, in general, for a better movie. Not always when you got fucking Harvey Weinstein chopping up movies left and right, but just some friction is good. When we see instead is, now Baumbach is over there, like fucking Colonel Kurtz, having spent $140 million on an adaptation of White Noise, which is a movie that takes place entirely in and around a fucking college campus in the Midwest. So that is where you end up. You end up in the creative weeds, trying to hack something out of just this big blob of money on a streaming service. Or, if you're a little late to the game and maybe a woman, if you're Greta Gerwig, you get to make a smart, thoughtful, subversive, actually, version of Barbie. You get to do IP for the studio. Those are your two options. That's where you get to go. There's no other place. Like, the best case scenario now is not that you get to make a movie and then have people see it and have every step of that process part of a careful, deliberative winnowing into, the highest amount of clarity of purpose and meaning. Instead, it's people just drowning in a sea of money. Or it's you being creatively strangled by the IP shackles that are required to get anything else made for any significant outside of the streaming economy. And of course, the Baumbach deal is running out. He's probably going to be one of the last guys to get that deal. The barn, they're closing. They're pissed. They're calling in the fucking dogs for this shit, because they're finally cranking down on the money supply. They're finally applying some fucking. They're applying some friction to the market. They're tapping the brakes a little bit. And so the first things that are going to get stress tested are these things where there's not even any theoretical money, where it's just a build the technology and capacity play, where profit is out the window, which is only possible because of quantitative easing, and applies to things like Netflix and fucking Netflix more than anything, but also like Lyft and stuff. Those guys are in trouble. Tesla, they had to sell their Bitcoin at a loss to show positive cash flow for the quarter, which is a big eyebrow raiser. But the most vulnerable of all is Netflix, because it doesn't really have anything. All that's its value add now, hey, we're going to create this like streaming capacity, has now been absorbed by people who have IP like Disney or Warner's, tech like Amazon, or basically a domination of the personal computing space in such a way that their profit flows elsewhere are such that they could throw money down that hole forever. Because I don't know how many people know this, but for the last decade or so, Apple has just been sitting on trillions of dollars that they can't settle anywhere, because there's nowhere that it'll be worth it to put in an investment versus what they're going to cost in taxes. And so they're just looking for places to write off money, and Apple Plus is part of that. And so they're going to be able to hang around forever. But Netflix has nothing. They frantically spent zillions of dollars to build a catalog, but they're just so far behind the eight ball compared to the other IP holders that they were never going to do it. But part of the strategy was get quality names and give them all the money they want, which is just like letting kids eat fucking sugar for every meal. Their teeth rot out. There's a couple of people who use the maximalist format and the indulgence well. Like, there's a reason Scorsese is one of the greatest, obviously. And it is that they can be like, oh, these insane idiots will give me all the money I want. All right, I'm going to use it to utilize special effects technology in such a way to intentionally alienate myself from the audience of this picture, to make them be pulled out of space and time, to be intentionally alienated in a Brechtian sense from what is being watched. And that is astounding, is that you have a $160 million exercise in Brechtian alienation. That's what the Irishman was. That's because Scorsese is the king. He's very, very talented. He's a genius, even in his late, he's almost 80 years old. Now, a lot of people say Scorsese, he's a middlebrow choice for best picture or best director. And that's when I say, hey, well, first of all, he's in the conversation for me. But the reason he's in for the conversation for me is, hey, idiot, film is a middlebrow genre. The more capital it takes to make a piece of art, the less art is in it. You could put it on a fucking chalkboard. And the anomaly of Netflix throwing money around where it doesn't have to relate to profits is what allows him to go in there and go, yeah, I'm going to poke the audience in the eye for 3 hours and basically do an old man look back at his life's work. Only for, like, it's Frank Sheehan looking back at his life's work of being in the mafia, and it's Scorsese looking back at his life's work of chronicling the mafia. And really what I think that movie is about is Scorsese, who grew up around gangsters in Little Italy, but who is a fucking nerd with asthma who had to stay home, is he looks through the mirror darkly at Sheeran and all of his protagonists, all of his criminal criminal anti-heroes. And he says, like, and he points out, like, their end is this this misery. It is this end state of total alienation from everyone. And I don't have to worry about that. I'm not suffering that because I get to do art. Because I get to tell stories about them instead of do that stuff. I mean, you know, I'm benefiting from the same capitalist machinery that they're all part of, because organized crime is like a load-bearing member of the capitalist political economy. It cannot not exist. In fact, it must exist, and it must be directed towards capitalism's ends, which is very easy because organized crime accumulates people who care about money. And therefore, they can be socially organized along a class interest that is basically orthogonal to, the legal classes. And they'll do what you need to do. They'll do the stuff that can't be done in a democracy. And that's a big part of the Irishman is the relationship with the Teamsters and the way that they warped the labor movement and maybe killed Kennedy. We are live. Why are people saying we're not live? I'm talking. Why do you think... all right, I will... Let me go to twitter.com and tweet. I'm going to do it right now. You're going to hear I'm live, dummies. Even if you're gaslighting me, I don't care. All right. So that's the kind of gold you occasionally get from this model. But what you're mostly going to get is people who are at the end of their creative rope, probably, who aren't getting challenged anymore, and now are just being indulged to their extremity. And they're going to be able to, it'll be interesting. It'll be better than, the gray man or whatever the fuck. But it will not be a movie, which is what they used to make, The challenge won't be there, so the effort won't rise to it. And that's why streaming is just a new and lower form of art. The problem with talking that way is that people get defensive because they think that if you say that a form of art is like less meaningful than another one, like, in terms of conveying the human spirit, all that stuff, all the abstract pleasures of art that are like the Apollonian elements of art that are rested right on top of our Dionysian desire for just distraction and indulgence, which make up, that's why we look at art also, because it feels good. But it doesn't just feel good, it also connects those feelings, the good feelings, to something that is eternally good. I'd say that's what art is. That doesn't mean that you're bad for consuming it. It's what's on offer, and we all need something, even if it's gruel. The problem comes when we decide that, no, the gruel is all there is, and that actually all that other stuff is worse or inferior, or at least the same thing, and I don't need to engage with it at all. There was a fucking tweet from like a British newspaper or something that said, people say that there's a less literate culture, but that doesn't acknowledge all the words that people consume in the television and films they watch. It's like, yes, because that's not fucking literacy. That's not reading, for Christ's sake. So that's why that's why I try to indulge the middle position, as I do in everything, where I just sort of try to suspend myself eternally, dialectically, between the Adorno critique of popular mass culture, which I think is a correct sketch of like its social function, and the fact that that's what I got, I'm not on a mountaintop, I'm in a house, I have time to spend, what do I want to spend it on? But I acknowledge it as that. What I don't do, and what I try not to do anyway, is try to infuse that consumption with political meaning. That is the most important thing. Because I earnestly believe that the cultural turn is really just a response to the death of politics. It's not the result of people making a choice to betray the revolution or sell out. It is that the grounds that they lived on, that fought on, had shifted underneath them. and they had to adjust themselves to this new reality in which the halls of power were closed. The real political action had been foreclosed. The CIA had gotten up to its business, assassinating everybody it needed to, but that's really just a mop-up operation. The real war is fought in the late 40s and early 50s. But by the time, we come up, we've seen the ground laid by, this machinery of death that just clipped our democracy such that it existed into this form. But, that's because the social engines that built class power from the ground up were sabotaged, were broken up, were blown up. Taft-Hartley dropped into the machine. Boom. You've lost your fucking... you've lost one of your fan belts. There you go. Red Scare. Boom. There go all the carburetors or whatever the fuck. I don't know anything about cars. But it takes a while for the machine to, it's still coasting on its own momentum. And we were there for a while, but it was since the 70s we've known, even if we can't say it, that there's no more horizon for political action. And so where else to go with culture? Hoping that maybe we can push the culture collectively through willing it in a direction that might get people to act differently, to reclaim their political destinies. That's, of course, what we're all going to want to think. Because what's the alternative? What's the real alternative? Smashing yourself to pieces against the state, defining yourself against the order until it destroys you. But we saw the people who tried to do that, and that ended up just being its own form of indulgence, as much as people going corporate or whatever the fuck, or making the cultural turn and deciding to go to the academy and tell everybody about, the semiotics of Elf in order to get them to become Marxists. My head is tic-tac shaped? I think that's true. It's pretty much a square. They called Scandos square heads, for anybody who's seen Deadwood, because they have this head shape. Minion? Maybe a minion also. But we're at this point now where people can no longer hope that their consumption of politics can stand in for action, because action is becoming imperative. Like, people feel a sense that, there's this thing coming towards me. There's this train coming towards me. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? And there's no guide because we burned the map. And so there's a huge incentive built into our social rituals, the ones that technology has bent us around, to seek to escape the question of action by creating pseudo-action, and consuming art is part of that. And again, I'd say that basically 100% of what passes for political conflict online, like what people are talking about, like at the very sharp end, like not even Democrats or Republicans, but like the left and the right as groups, is people shouting into a mirror, and that they are both beholden to their paralysis, both addicted to their participation in the orgone cycle of online politics, both made sick by that because they feel the anxiety deepen and can't do anything about it. They feel the misery deepen, the alienation deepen, and can't do anything about it, and loathe their own inaction, but they cannot confront it, so they have to recognize it in a mirrored, twisted image where their participation in it is laundered, basically. Like, you get to look, if you're a lib, you get to look at if you're a socialist, you get to look at the right, the Groypers, as these death-obsessed psychopaths, basically, who want to see the world burn. Well, by their actions, by your actions and their actions are basically the same. Your actual things you do in your life. The stuff you do, the stuff they do, it's the same thing. And if that's bringing about the end of the world, well, then you're doing it too. You just are thinking differently about it. And it's the thinking differently about it that makes them bad and you good. But that is superfluous. You have to pick a side for the thing to work. You have to get on one side or the other of the seesaw for the thing to go. Or like you're the two hands on the pump car. You know, in the old cartoons, pump car going down the railroad track. You need two hands for that. Some of them can use one, but a lot of them have two. Because like that is the thing that all of this is meant to overlook is we feel this anxiety, which manifests as loathing of the self, but also loathing of others, loathing of who we feel is responsible for the moment, who we feel is responsible for why we're here. Now remember, we feel some responsibility of ourselves. And I would argue that for the most part, that is a neuroses. If you're not amongst the actual like architecture of power, if you don't have capital that you are actively managing, I think you can't even be said to really be responsible in anything other, in any way that is real. Like your day-to-day actions are the same as in their intent and interaction with others as most other people in the dispossessed class are. But we feel responsible because we're putative political subjects in a putative democracy. And it's our commitment to that belief that belief in ourselves as that makes us feel this degree of guilt. And it's the guilt that has to be turned into hatred of others and punishment. Someone has to be responsible. Now, if we could look at it as a system and eliminate the judgment, the need to judge ourselves or others for their participation, then we can notice, oh, the people responsible for this, I've never seen one of them in my life. Probably you haven't. The people I interact with on a day-to-day basis, regardless of their political opinions, are in the same boat as me. And then you can say, okay, well, what do we have to do to survive this thing that's coming towards us, this train on these tracks that we're locked to? What do we do? And we have two choices. We can try to get on the pump train, or we can find someone to put in front of us. Now, here's the difference between those two actions. The pump thing, that's not a political choice in the way that we think of it. It's not voting for somebody. It is actually doing something on a daily basis, cumulatively, with other people towards a goal, pumping it out there. Because that is all you can do to engage with a capitalism that has been fully abstracted to servers, to algorithms that are inaccessible spatially and conceptually to the average person that you might think you represent. Somebody says, do I do any rituals? This is basically my ritual right here. The biggest one I do anyway. But if the question isn't, what am I going to do together to avoid this from happening? If instead it's, well, it's not going to not happen. It has to happen because I'm addicted to the things that it gives me. And I can't move because I'm scared to be in a situation that's less pleasurable in the moment than the one I'm in now because I can only imagine things getting worse. But there still is politics. Well, then I can vote for somebody to get put in front of me so that I can watch them get hit by the fucking train before it hits me. So that I can get some joy out of living, some joy out of being a political subject, participating in seeing somebody whose fault this is to take the fucking the cowcatcher in the face before we get it. And I would say that that desire is what stitches together the entire corpus of the American political body. Now you could say, on the left, that's not fair. What about people who want socialism? Yes, socialism would be a way out of that. But socialism cannot be built politically right now. What can be built politically right now is machines of retribution. At the national level, I'm saying, at the local level, local politics could be an expression of that pump action I was talking about. But at the national level, it can only be a weapon of what is perceived as defense against the other, and then retribution. Now, the problem here, and the reason that so many liberals are terrified, even though they can't move, just like the rest of us, is that this is wildly asymmetrical. These are wildly asymmetrical political alliances. Like, when we talk about people who are sick of the system, who would go against it, who would break its rituals, who would willingly go into a defiant relationship to all that is, there's plenty of people like that. Now, there are a lot more people who have been beaten into acquiescence or terrified into it. But there are a bunch of people who are just sick of this shit. But they can only be meaningfully politically aligned by the right through the mechanisms of spectacular politics that we're all fixed within. Because on the right, you have a vastly larger group of people who are willing to conceive of conflict. Why? Because they would not be going against the state. They imagine that they would be claiming the mandate of the state. Police, high-ranking military officers, suburban dipshits who wear camo and like hang out with cops and police officers. They have private firearms. Now, within this bipartisan structure, plenty of people who vote Democrat are like, fuck this system. I would go down and I would throw down against it. Many of them have. They vote for Democrats out of the compulsion that they're better than Republicans. But they are not organized. They do not have that kind of relationship to the security institutions of America. And so they conceive of a rupture as confronting state power. And that's terrifying. And that means, and it's exacerbated by the fact that the higher you are within this structure, as in you're not voting for Democrats, you are a Democrat, or you demographically are among the group of Democrats who actually determine who gets to run for Democratic offices, you have absolutely no desire to see a rupture because you're still sitting in your fucking suburban home fat as a calf. Because your side won the culture war of the 60s, which was a necessary victory because capitalism has to be in a global capitalism must be cosmopolitan in culture. It is necessary. And that's why a bunch of dipshits think that defending national reactionary social formations is some path to conflict with capital. But that is organized around this land-based capital that is essentially a residue of feudal social order and is grounded in a way that your participation as just a voter or rooter for the right isn't. And which means that in a rupture, it will reassert itself using the technology of capitalism. It will not advance away from, it will not advance from capitalism to socialism. It will regress to the sort of technologically infused feudal land-based regime of domination. Because that is what's getting the backup of organized resistance on the right to capitalism. It is not exploitation through class. It is alienation from culture. Because no matter what the actual class position of someone who is, in a sense of personal identity, consider themselves a rightist, it is a belief in the hierarchy, the vestigial hierarchy of pre-capitalist social formations. And we are left with the task to infuse the relatively few decisions we get to make in a day with meaning and remove them from the realm of the automatic. And that sucks because you can't talk about it. You can only really, honestly, you can only be poetic about it. And this is not a poetic age. This is a place where if you want people to hear you, if you want people to hear your voice, it has to be, it has to speak in like a very concrete prose, because we've robbed, I mean, it sounds, you know, cheesy to say, but it is true. We've robbed, as we've robbed the public square of spirituality, we rob it of poetry, because we rob it of that, if the recognition that there is something unspeakable, unobservable, undescribable about experience. We labor under the cultural delusion that that is not the case, and we're being driven insane, in fact, by that, by the inability to communicate poetically. We can only communicate literally, which that's for machines, that's for robots, which capitalism is trying to turn us into. So you got to put poetry into your life. That sounds super fruity. I know, I'm sorry, but it is true. That's all I got over here. And the way that I feel better about that is like, yeah, that sucks. That's not very good, but I'm one schmuck. This is not my job. This is not my job. This is not getting to aha is not any of our specific jobs. Our specific job is to be there for it. To be there for history as it occurs, and steeling ourselves and directing our minds towards that goal, and then playing a part that will be determined by time and space and chance in a way that cannot be anticipated and would be foolish to try to, because if you anticipate it, you are basically locking yourself into a doomed relationship with it, because guess what, whatever you tell yourself how it's going to go, that's what your secret, demonic little chipping voice wants it to be. That is the motivated reasoning of someone who is locked in a libidinal relationship with spectacle. I know I am. Because if you can sketch out something that you believe is going to happen, and then act towards it, politically, I mean, like as an architecture, as like large events, not events in your life. Talking the broad ones, saying, well, I can't think about what's going to happen in my life until I really understand what's going to happen in the next 5 years globally, nationally. Nope. That thing you're going to build out of that's that ship in a bottle, and it's a ship that is you're designed to go onto with the other opium addicts. And I am, at the end of the day, a fucking optimist. Because, like, what is the moral, political, what is the animating morality of socialism? It is the creation of heaven on earth. Not heaven as communion with God, which we cannot have, but heaven as we imagine it in a folk sense, as a place where people live through time, through perception, through sensation, but without alienation. And of course, like, it is a cornerstone of liberal understanding of the world, the one that they've been trying to drill into our heads for 150 years, is that that's impossible, and that any politics that has that at its base cannot be successful. It's going to kill everybody. If you think you, but the reality is that anything that is not driven by that, anything that is in fact driven by the end stage capitalist concept of man as essentially at war with itself, can only be directing itself subconsciously towards annihilation. Like, congratulations, by avoiding utopian thinking, you have guaranteed a dystopian actual ending. And what would that look like, given our understanding of what humans are capable of? We'll look back at history and see what humans acting in concert can do in terms of extending their consciousness to each other, beyond one another, using technology. I mean, we've seen enough examples just in the actual history we've lived. We don't even have to fucking imagine and extrapolate into the future like the sci-fi folks have been doing for the last couple hundred years. You can just look at what we've done. Every element for a global Sweden, basically. You know, a place where maybe people do kill themselves because there's nothing, because it's kind of boring, but there's like a basic dignity to life, and therefore a resultant relatively low level of social pathology. Just like, that is absolutely achievable given what we developed technologically as a species over the last 100 years. From not just high-tech shit like the computer. Like, obviously we've conquered any computational problem with computing, but also just basic shit like the Green Revolution, allowing for like never before understood or conceived possible population densities in the world. Transportation, energy, we've solved this shit. But instead, those pieces are being put together to make a fucking weapon of destruction that's going to kill everything, because it was all built in the context of capitalist accumulation. And of course, capitalists want to look at all the advancement and say that was capitalism. It's like, no, all the doom. Now, of course, you might say, global Sweden, that sounds boring and dickless and shitty. And yeah, if you're like socially reactionary, or you're even just like anti-woke, which, you know, fair enough at this point. It's just, if you're still caring about this stuff, at some point you're going to pick a side, and just out of boredom. So I don't blame anybody who picks any side if they're, you know, I don't care. But of course, global Sweden would not look like Sweden. Global Sweden would not be capitalist, because Sweden is capitalist at the end of the day. It's just one part of a capitalist machine that is able to negotiate a spatially and geographically fixed relationship with capitalism that was only sustainable there. Those conditions globally is not some some fucking Ingmar Bergman movie with a bunch of people looking longingly into the distance. It's people working towards goals, all of them, that are socially and individually aligned. That's not the machinery of Orwell that he feared of. And that's because he saw the Soviet Union in the context of scarcity. It would be people moving towards their best use of their own will in accordance with their position. And I think if you don't have that as a political horizon, then your politics are worthless. Because the only alternative to global Sweden is geo-hell. This point has been made for a very long time. Rosa Luxemburg most famously put it in Socialism or Barbarism. It's banal and it's true. So you have to ask yourself, how do you get there? And I think that for a lot of people who even on the right who would say, those are my politics, global Sweden, white people everywhere having a good time. Again, it's about the process of building it. A society that makes global Sweden through genocide will be internally warped. Because guess what? It will not be in creating socialism. It can't create socialism. It will not dethrone capitalism within itself. It will try to maintain this surplus, this Volk surplus diverted to the center by starving every periphery. Holy shit. When I'm saying when I say global Sweden, I mean global Swedish standard of living. I'm not talking about anything other than that. We're talking about, given the conditions that we have in this world, given this technology we have now, how could people live? Like, as in access to things like healthcare and calories, rewarding work, safe, clean streets. That's all I mean. Oh, it's fascism. Yeah, sure. I'm saying it is this spatially and geographically fixed relationship to capitalism that, of course, is dissolving all those spatially fixed relationships that got built over the course of the truce between labor and capital in the post-war era. They're all unraveling, and they're creating these baronial revolts by local reactionaries. Because there's no working class to resist anymore. They've been defeated. And I'm saying a world with global Swedish standard of living does not have the social problems of Sweden. It doesn't have no problems. It has personal problems. Everybody is. Who was it who said it's socialism is converting hysterical misery into everyday unhappiness, because we can all live with everyday unhappiness. We cannot live with hysterical misery. We drive ourselves to destruction to escape it. And the baronial revolt is a goddamn absolute dead end. Watching Peter Thiel say, like, "Oh, we're going to need to do techno theocracy here to save capitalism and save freedom." Like, guess what? That's exactly the goal that the fucking globo homo agenda that you're trying to defeat is trying to do. Is empower the algorithm formally. It's been in power for a while now. Honestly, the same year that that Terminator 2 was released is the year that the algorithm became self-aware, 1991, fall of the Soviet Union. But of course, it's hidden behind these inefficient screens of democratic accountability that are undermining its ability to function. Because we have to all act like politics still exist, even though they don't. And so now we've got this gridlock where no crisis, and the crises are just going to keep piling up on top of each other. Look at fucking, good Lord, Corona's still running wild, and now we got monkeypox showing up. Of course, for the right, seeing these crises pile up and then become unaddressable, this can only be explained by secret cabals and great resets. It has to be intentional. Because things like the United States and capitalism and the Constitution are good and have good, are a blueprint for stable and secure and upward advancing government, not a unstable truce that is constantly being undermined by changing economic conditions. And so it's a great reset. Look, they're gonna. When global warming starts like swamping huge parts of the world, they'll be like, yes, they made this happen. They're trying to get rid of, they're cutting the power. They're cutting our food supply. It's like, no, this system can no longer sustain itself because of its piling internal contradictions that political paralysis have rendered unaddressable. And the only sense that the reactionary revolt against capitalism can make of that is as plans, as cabals. And any working class energy that joins the right will be organized around those principles because they don't have the ballast, they don't have the the cultural capital and real capital that would be based on to present an alternative theory. So yeah, like we're going to just fall from the bottom into a pit which we can't speak of. And that pit is not, here's the most important thing. That pit is not the end of the world. That pit is not the real inferno. That pit is just beyond the pale of settlement, beyond the legible world that we who are in this hall of mirrors have arranged to make sense of our world. It's just out of the picture. It's out of contention. It's out of the political subjectivity that we are all related to one another within. And then those who aren't falling are going to be moving to one of two spatially fixed capital accumulations that are going to have the same robot security guards and psychotically armed police and physically removed elite, but different political rituals around that and different stigmatized groups to be ritually punished for the misery everyone feels, but can only be directed in its blame outward because we've lost the voice. We've lost the voice of the human race, which was supposed to be the self-conscious working class speaking together. Now it's just a cacophony of people who consider themselves, first and foremost, as consumers. Not their fault, not their choice. This is why I have to reject at the end of the day conspiracy fixation, because it is a search, even from the left, for someone to blame and punish. And that is surrendering our political horizon and saying we're not going to imagine anything better anytime in the future. We're going to imagine payback for what's going to happen anyway. And I think any of that energy that goes out in the world is going to get used by capital. It's not going to be... Because violence, I'm not talking violence. Violence on behalf of a nascent and growing, connecting working class movement, that's the purest sort of sacrifice. I mean, my God, you're talking John Brown stuff there. But, the time for that is obviously not now. Because where is the working class structures to direct it? They don't exist. They will be made by the future. And we'll all have to be there for it. But anything that wants to find someone to blame now is just going to be playing into the hands of a capital that will take that energy in any direction it wants. But anyway, to get back to why I'm an optimist. So that thing I described, right? The utopian horizon where you have people working technologically together towards full consciousness, full species consciousness. Well, just logically, the same way that Christians say that, God has to exist because we can imagine him, that has to have happened somewhere because we can imagine it. Because when we're talking about human history, and not human as like a species, but human as consciousness, as conscious life, which humanity is part of, but only one strand of a much denser connection of states and manners of consciousness, then that history is also unbound by time. The number of chances, the number of conditions that emerge are basically limitless, which means that the number of outcomes is essentially unbound. And that's one of those outcomes. And since that's going to happen somewhere someday, then any act we make towards its goal will make us feel good. See, I'm basically doing a humanist version of Rocco's basilisk here, because those guys are, of course, the people who have extinguished any notion of the sacred, any notion of the the unquantifiable truth, and have resurrected that without even knowing it in the form of this algorithm that they worship because they imagine that it is outside of them, but really it's just a container for their selfishness. And they're like, oh yeah, that machine got built somewhere, and if you're not helping it get built, it's going to punish you. Well, what? Look at there. The goal. What's making you act? Fear of punishment. You're just resurrecting the angry god of Protestantism that drove capitalism to destroy the world in the first place. And what a shock. This is it at its end stage, when you've got to the point where smart people really can't take religion seriously if they want to be in another room with a bunch of other smart people who understand computers and such. Because we all know that sky fairy stuff is nonsense, but future omnipotent time-traveling AI, well, that's certainly something we can consider. You've just made God again, dude, but you've made it you've made it not as a repository of connectedness and the love that connectedness is represented by in our experience, but rather our reptilian loathing of one another, our fear. So we can only act because the machine is compelling us to act, not because we want to. Want in the deepest centered sense, not of wanting to satisfy our neuroses and our pathological relationship to the things around us in a way that distracts us from our deepest feelings, but one that makes a resonance throughout our entire being. And we all know, we can't, once again, this is a thing where we know what this is, but we cannot really describe it to each other because it is an individual experience. But we all know that feeling. And the reason everyone is going crazy is because we live in a society where we are basically forbidden from doing things like that most of the time. And I know I did say we live in a society, but it's true, we really do. The Joker was onto something there. And we live in one where to advance the self, which we rationally understand is what we should be doing, we have to abjure things that make us feel that way. And so we have to build an angry, punishing God to compel us to act one way, allowing us to indulge ourselves in other ways. So we have to just find things that make us feel that way and then build around them lives that can accommodate them and then can connect them to other people who can feel the same thing. Because people getting together who feel the same pull towards acting together are beyond compulsion. This is one of the big, but the thing that gets us to that point, it has to be a combination of our values, our abstract values, but also our necessity, like what we have to do to survive. There has to be a moment when we can bring those together. And one of the real problems of the contemporary left, and what prevents it from being a left in a meaningful sense, is that by definition it is largely volunteer. And a voluntary left is one that will skew disproportionately towards the people who understand their experience of capitalism as one of guilt and accountability and a desire to have that expunged. And that means that their engagement with politics will tend towards, in large enough samples, to be indulgent. Not that there won't be a desire to do good things there and people who want to do good things there, but they will always be swimming against that current. And this is why the labor movement is always and only and forever the last best hope of humanity, because it is made up of people who are in it to win it, personally, for their families, for the people that they love, in the near term, say, like conditions around them, and then meeting with others who can give voice to an understanding of the world that can make sense of their position, and then act collectively. Now, like the Bolshevik Party, of course, was made up, the reason that the Bolshevik Party will forever be the model is because it won. And it won in part because it was actually both of these things. You had a bunch of fancy boy emigres, largely. Not all of them. Some of them came from the working class, like Bukharin. But, Bukharin was just like Lenin. He was a schoolmaster's kid. There were a couple of working class kids, but they mostly they were people who came out of the labor movement, the trade union movement in Russia. Then you have a bunch of emigres who get to sit around in coffee shops and think about theory all the time. And so when they come together in 1917, it is this machine that clicks into place. People who were on the ground and did the organizing from the bottom up out of necessity because they weren't getting any fucking food to eat, and the people who were doing it to expurgate guilt and to enact like a life of a will to power that all modern subjects do have to some degree or another. And they went to war together, and they overthrew the Tsar. But in the process of winning the war, the working class half of it was essentially destroyed because they were the guys who fought the war. They mostly a lot of them got shot. And that politically active, connected, conscious working class was replaced in the cities by a new generation of displaced peasants whose relationship to the Bolshevik Party and the Soviet state became more akin to the relationship between the up-jumped and uprooted peasants who made up the post-Vita British Russian working class, Russian working class, and the old Tsarist regime. And all you have is this new bureaucracy on top. Which ended up carrying out not the agenda of like the Russian people, and not the agenda really of the working classes in like their felt interests, but rather modernization of Russia, the creation of a competitive capital formation, a technologically advanced state capable of going toe-to-toe with the other technologically advanced capitalist states, but not using capitalism because their faith basically prevented them from making it capitalism. And because at the tail end of the stick, once you get out of Europe, out of Western Europe and the United States, and you get to larger, older social formations, and you have advanced capitalism engaging with them, they don't get to they don't get to build capitalism the way those countries did. They have it imposed on them the way it's imposed on colonial subjects. And that means stagnation at the bottom. That means domination by foreign powers, which nobody, whether they're a putative Marxist who wants to, save Russia and build Russia so that it can advance the cause of the global working class, or just a great Russian nationalist who doesn't really have a vocabulary of class consciousness. You can align on that goal, and that is the goal that Stalin allied around. And he did the same thing that the up-jumped active bourgeois did in every country. And of course, it's very fitting that Stalin himself was neither a worker nor one of the bourgeois exiles. He was a fucking lumpen proletarian criminal. He was a guy whose dad was an alcoholic shoemaker who got his ass beat every day, lived on the street, hung out at a monastery or a seminary to get to some free meals, and then became a street criminal in his teens, and also a poet. Meaning that he is not subject to the same specific intellectual and spiritual narcissisms as the other old Bolsheviks. He is able to see clearly in a way that they aren't what needs to be done. You got Trotsky as the smartest of all of them, of course, but also the one absent Lenin's will to power. Lenin's brain blows up because he can't handle the contradictions, basically. But Trotsky is left here in a position where he wants to build socialism in Russia as a way of advancing the war against global capitalism, to be the real prophet, to embody that prophetic role.
But he also doesn't want to kill 1 million peasants to do it. He doesn't want to build a machinery of exploitation the likes that the capitalists did. He understands that that's not what socialism is supposed to do. Communists are supposed to build out of the wreckage created by that process. They're not supposed, with the machinery and the capital that had been built up, they're not supposed to exercise it themselves. But he still wants to do it, so he's left paralyzed and basically begs somebody to take power from him. Trotsky, again and again, is given an opportunity to advance himself in a way that would have allowed him to meaningfully confront Stalin for power. And at every point, he steps back. He says, no, that would be wrong, because he doesn't really want power, because he shrinks away from the responsibility of doing what deep down he knows needs to be done. Then you've got Bukharin and the right, who I think had the best diagnosis of the situation, I think, were the Bukharinites, and that they said, oh, social revolution is not coming worldwide, which means we're not getting rescued by the Germans, but also if we try to build a industrial state that can compete with the West meaningfully, it will be at the cost of going to war with our own peasantry, which that's not in the socialism playbook. And he was right about that. But what Bukharin imagined instead was a system where essentially he essentially wanted to do perestroika 70 years earlier. He wanted to extend NEP and build a market relationship with the peasantry to use capitalism to get them to advance their agricultural production the way that they did in the West. And the problem there is that might be theoretically possible, but a cold, clear look at the conditions the Soviet Union faced in that period will tell you that the West would not have stood for that the introduction of capitalism would have meant the breaking up and the severing of the Soviet Union, the overthrow of Bolshevism, and probably the end of Russia. Now, maybe you get enough drinks in Bukharin, he might be okay with that, because what's Russia? It's the working class. Like, I understand this, something we have to work with because it's a historical reality, but it's not real in a way that I should emotionally connect myself to. Guys like Stalin actually thought Russia was the whole thing. So Stalin is able to embody this knowledge that none of the other factions can accept, and then he neutralizes them all in time. He allies with Bukharin to neutralize Zinoviev and Kamenev, and then turns right around and neutralizes Bukharin and carries out what Kamenev and Zinoviev and Trotsky for a while were all demanding. But here's the thing: none of them would have been able to go through with it. And if they can't go through with it, what happens to the Soviet Union? And that's because Stalin did not have a utopian horizon to his politics at the end of the day. There are notes in Stalin's archive where he's got like volumes of Engels, and like Engels is talking about, the how socialism would extinguish, hierarchies, and it would extinguish monetary economy and stuff like that. And he would just write ha 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 next to it. He believed that it's war, man against man, man is wolf to man. All right, so that's this week. I've decided I'm going to do Richard Lachman, RIP's book, First Class Passengers on a Sinking Ship, for the next book, but not maybe for a couple weeks, because I said I might get Sam Grandin on the show to talk about making of global capitalism, but might do another Q&A up maybe later this week before we get to there. So stay tuned. Keep it sleazy. Bye-bye.